Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome to another edition of On Texas Football, our way too early preseason preview. And actually, we're getting close to the actual season. So on our last game of our way too early breakdowns, we're talking about the Texas A&M Aggies, ladies and gentlemen. You're rekindling, the renewing, the restoration of the rivalry. Everybody's excited about this year. CJ, I even read that the most expensive average ticket price for the 2024 season, Texas A&M, $625. Who knows? It could be worth a whole lot more before then. I even saw a note that said that the Texas A&M game is outselling the Texas A&M Notre Dame game by nearly 30%. And that game's at the end of the season. One's at the beginning of the season. People are pumped for this rivalry to be back.
As they should be, right? We've waited for so long to have this game back. Now it's off the timeline. It's back on the gridiron. I can't wait. You know, the Sarkisian says it all the time, right? The passion and the pageantry of college football will be on display with this game specifically. There may not be a more anticipated football game in the entire country, especially inside the state of Texas. But man, to have this game back, to have that rivalry renewed, especially in year one of the SEC and with the year one of Mike Elko, that's all you can ask for. It's going to be very exciting, Rod.
Yeah, and speaking of, we can start there. Mike Elko, who was obviously once with the Aggies as their defensive coordinator, then he went to Duke. And by the way, the last 2 years, 16-9 at Duke. They won a lot of games there at Duke, 2 bowl games. So he knows defense. He knows this Aggie culture. He knows the tradition really well. So Aggie fans are excited about that. But Colin Klein in the offense, I think, is where more of the question marks are. Colin Klein coming in as the new offensive coordinator. Holman Wiggins actually coming in, one of the more respected wide receiver coaches in the country. He's also the wide receiver coach here. So this is where I think where we should start, the offensive side of the ball. And if you're going to start on offense with the Aggies, I think you got to start the quarterback, because I think the Aggie, the trajectory of this team could be very, very different if Connor Wigman actually reaches his ceiling as a player. There are some people, I saw Matt Miller's draft report, where he actually in his early mock draft for the 2025 draft actually had Connor Wigman as a top 20 pick. Had him going to the Rams, I believe, there. So there are some. Pro Football Focus will give you some of those numbers in a second. They believe Connor Wigman ultimately has a first-round upside as a quarterback talent. I think that's where it starts for the Aggies and maybe where it ends too. If they keep Connor Wigman healthy, you could be talking about the Aggies exceeding a lot of the expectations this year.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? If you keep Connor Wigman upright and healthy, I think you're going to have a capable offense, right? There's still some question marks there, and obviously the loss of Ruben Owens for the season, as Texas has experienced with a pair of running backs, very significant and very unfortunate for Texas A&M. Of course, former 5-star out of El Campo, expected to have a big sophomore campaign. That was obviously cut down a bit too soon for college football fans across the country, especially those that followed his recruitment. But Connor Wigman, in my eyes, Rod, is a very talented quarterback. I think he's right on the verge of being a top 5 quarterback in the SEC coming into the year. Again, has only played about 8 or 9 full games in his career, has been dinged up often. The question right now is, will that offensive line protect for him? I know that they went out and they added a pair of guys to that offensive line that we'll talk about here in a minute. But going through Connor Wigman's numbers from a year ago, 120 pass attempts, 980 yards, right? Played about 3.5 games, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So you see kind of the glimpses. He had that big game against Miami early in the season where, it looked like, okay, they got something here with those wide receivers. Well, some of those wide receivers are gone, right? No more Evan Stewart. Now you're starting to figure out who your wide receiver ones are going to be. And that's kind of an issue right now in Texas A&M. Having talked to some folks close to the program over there, Rod, they got talented bodies. But do they have that surefire number one that they can go to in a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and long, whatever the situation is, and know that he's going to create separation and come down with the catch? You want that to be Noah Thomas if you're Texas A&M, but will that be the case? Moose Muhammad's another talented player. Jade Walker returns. They got 3 really talented wide receivers, but do they have a number one? I think that's kind of more of an underrated issue in College Station at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if they do find a number one and that offensive line can protect, there's a lot of ifs right there. I think Connor Wigman can be one of the better quarterbacks in the country. I'm with you. I'll give you talk
that's
about
the whole thing, Ron. It's a whole lot of ifs. I'm with you.
Ifs, buts, candies, and nuts, my old coach used to say, right? A lot of those ifs. But Connor Wigman, you talk about that Miami game. I went and looked it up. Miami got 29 pressures in that game. They sacked him once.
Yeah.
He is amazing at sack avoidance. He does a great job being able to negotiate pressure. I always criticize Quinn a little bit. You look at pressure to sack numbers for Quinn last year, he was close to 30%. Pressure to sack numbers, the pressure to sack rate for Connor Wigman, 7.3%.
Wow.
He's really good at being able to navigate and negotiate, I should say, pressure in the pocket. But let me give you a couple other numbers about Connor Wigman. I went down the deep dive. I know you like Pro Football Focus like I do. So they're really high on this guy. Just to give you some numbers. First of all, the last 2 years, look at every other A&M quarterback in the last 2 years. They're 7-10, 52 QBR, 21 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 6.6 yards per drop back. Look at Connor Wigman the last 2 years, 5-3, 74 QBR, 16 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 7.2 yards per drop back. Very different quarterback room when Connor Wigman is playing at a high level. And this is what I love about him. His overall grade, this is, by the way, Pro Football Focus numbers. Before the injury last season, they had him top 5 in overall grade at quarterback at 91.9. They had his passing grade at 90.9. And he produced in the 90th percentile in these categories, 96th percentile in clean pocket grade, 97th percentile in standard drop back grade, 94th percentile in first and second down, early down. That's a 91.2 Pro Football Focus grade, 92.6 Pro Football Focus grade when he's got a clean pocket. He's 97th percentile in non-play action pass reps, 94th percentile on throws beyond the sticks, 98th percentile on avoiding negative plays. By the way, that's a 10.3, I believe this is turnover worthy play rate was pretty low. 88th percentile in sack rates, that's sack avoidance, even though his offensive line was dreadful last year. We'll get into that. And time to throw, 2.7 seconds. If you look at third and long, his third and long Pro Football Focus grade is 88. I mean, I'm telling you, based on the metrics say if you extrapolate Connor Wigman's starts and his stats and you extrapolate his production, that he will at least exceed expectations and project to be a first-round caliber player if he can stay healthy. The if, buts, candies, and nuts, as you said. So, by the way, let's start with the offensive line because that's the big question, right? If he's going to stay healthy, it's about the protection. And he does have a veteran left tackle, Trey Zune, who's one of the best left tackles in all of the SEC. I think he's a top 5 tackle in the SEC, in my opinion. I think he's that good. And then on the other side, they also, I believe it's going to be Chase Biscontis is going to be the other right tackle potentially. And that's the interior of the offensive line where I think there are a lot of question marks for the Aggies. But on the tackles, on the perimeter, I think they're actually pretty solid. Yeah,
definitely. And they went out, I believe from Utah, they added, or perhaps BYU, is the school out west. The center this year, I'm going to butcher this name, Colinu Fayu. Oh, man.
Sounds good to me.
That one, man. That's a tough one. I butchered the name, but he's a heck of a talent. So I wanted to shout him out a little bit. He's going to be the center right now. I know that they added him out of the portal this year. Again, that inconsistency for Texas A&M in the years past with that offensive line has been in large part due to a revolving door in the interior. And Rod, I think you're right. You know, Trey Zune's a very talented piece right now. They saw Cam Dewberry get some time last year at right tackle. He then had to move inside. They had all sorts of moving pieces inside this offensive line. Mark Nabu, a talented kid from the Pacific Northwest, expected to make a leap again this year. But again, is health going to be a deterrent for this entire offense starting up front? Because they've just dealt with it. And so, again, I don't know what the ceiling of this offensive line or offense in total is going to be because there's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of question marks with this group. One thing I know for sure, Rod, and I kind of want to lump this in with the offensive line, I do think they have 2 really talented tight ends. First is Trey Watson coming in from Fresno State. That's a guy with production and experience. The other one, Donovan Green, who out of Dickinson was a very highly coveted prospect coming in. He tore his ACL last year prior to the start of the season, did not play as a true freshman. They have high hopes for him right now. I think those tight ends duos, as we've talked about, you know, the style in which Colin Klein likes to play his offense. We saw what kind of a role like a Ben Sinnott could have for Kansas State. Expect something similar from either of those tight ends this year at Texas A&M. I think that's going to be a big part of this offense moving forward in the pass game and in the run blocking game.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, you look at K-State football last couple of years. They love their tight ends. They love their power sets. And I agree with you 100%. And one thing I think is interesting, talking about, you know, the offense in general for the Aggies. Last year when they moved on, well, they didn't move on, but it was Jimbo Fisher's offense, but with Bobby Petrino calling the plays. That offense improved tremendously. I mean, they went from in 2023, they scored 160 more points than they did in 2022. That's drastic improvement. Actually, remember in 2022, they only scored more than 28 points. They waited to the last game of the season before they could eclipse 28 points. So this offense was improved last year. It'll be an entirely new offense. And what I think Colin Klein's going to bring to the table specifically is the ability to finish drives. How about this stat? Last year, the Aggies, 54% of their offensive plays, close to 55% actually, were in opponent's territory. So they got a lot of plays in opponent's territory. They just couldn't cash in. Sound familiar, Longhorn fans? Their touchdown percentage in the red zone, 82nd. Not as bad as the Longhorns, 120th, but 82nd. They were at 59%. They were 48th. I think at 48th overall in the score percentage in the red zone at 86%. If they could cash in more in those red zone opportunities, and I know Longhorn fans feel the same way, this Aggie offense could look very, very different. And how do we know? Because K-State, they were one of the best in the country. You remember this, CJ, doing the research on K-State. One of the best in the country cashing in when they were in the red zone. They were 30th in score percentage in the red zone with Colin Klein calling the plays. 89% of the time they scored in the red zone. And they were second in the country, second overall in touchdown percentage in the red zone. Making it even more remarkable, sidebar, that Texas stopped them on a goal line stand in the red zone in that K-State game this year. Like, that was remarkable. Just know how crazy that is, guys. Nobody was able to stop K-State in the red zone, let alone on the goal line. And Texas did that. So they were second in the country last year in touchdown percentage in the red zone. That's Colin Klein. If they can now improve on that, take leaps and bounds in that area, that also be a huge area of improvement for the Aggies. No question.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting then, I know Will Howard, a talented quarterback, Avery Johnson, also a talented quarterback for Kansas State under Colin Klein last year. What was kind of a similar, characteristic used by Colin Klein, who also, going back to his playing days, Rod, he was in the Heisman finalist for what reason, right? He could run the ball. So to have that ability between the two guys at Kansas State and his background, obviously, leads me to think that, hey, they're going to want to run a Connor Wakeman, but will they be able to? Ooh. Will his health hold up? Because we talked about it earlier, Rod. You mentioned it. He's a great athlete. Sack avoidance, his ability to maneuver through the pocket, elite. But does he have 5 to 10 to perhaps 15 carries in him in a given game without going down to injury? I think that limits what that offense could do, or at least what Colin Klein wants that offense to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And a lot of it will be the wide receivers. You talked about it. They don't necessarily have a lot of proven commodities, recognizable names. I would say they did get in the transfer portal a young man, Jabri Barber, I believe from Troy, if I'm not mistaken, he's from. He actually, 115 targets last year, nearly 1,000 yards last season. He had, I believe he ended up with 76 receptions. But you go look at it, he had 6 drops, which is probably a little bit of a problem. But you add him with Ja'Day Walker and you add him with Noah Thomas that you brought up. If you go look at, they have 3 wide receivers in that wide receiving core who had at least a 70 Pro Football Focus grade and at least 25 targets. If you go look at it, if you just take that as your threshold, that's the criteria for any wide receiving core in the SEC. At least a 70 Pro Football Focus grade and at least 25 targets. If you just take that as your cutoff, they actually have leaders in terms of the SEC receiving core in targets, yards, snaps, receptions, touchdowns, and drops, by the way. So it's an underrated receiving core in terms of productivity and production. If Connor Wigman stays healthy, once again, if butts, candies, and nuts, if he stays healthy, if they get the offensive line together, that wide receiving core can actually make some noise. They could actually make, and along with the tight ends that you just brought up as well.
Yeah. Definitely. And they're getting tested on the defensive side of the ball too, every day in practice, just as Texas has been doing in their fall camp, right? I want to use this time, Rod, to pivot over to the defense, because I do think that defensive line has some guys. We've talked about it. Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams going up against, Trey Moore and Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell every day and it's helping them improve. Well, Texas A&M might have one of the best pass rushers in all the country. That's obviously Nick Scowerton, right? He's being mocked very early, Rod, to be a first-round pick at some point in the 2025 NFL draft. Originally from College Station, came over by way of Purdue. Heck of a football player, Rod. And now Texas will be tasked with keeping him away from Quinn Ewers.
Honestly, I read a stat about, not a stat, more of a fact about him that I found amazing. He's a team captain already. He's already a team captain. He's 19 years old.
Wow, I did not know that.
He's 19 years old. He's a team captain already. Just got there. Something tells me, this guy is really impressive. Like I said, I don't know for a fact, but you don't become a team captain with a new team when you just got there, unless you've shown impressive ability to lead from the jump. And to be 19 years old, guys, I don't think y'all have any idea, CJ does, but how good his last season at Purdue was in the Big Ten. He led the Big Ten in sacks. 15 tackles for loss, 50 tackles. This guy's an impact player. And yeah, there's some people, I think the last mock draft by ESPN Field Yates, they had him drafted in the top 15. Like they had him really out top 15, top 20. Really good player. So I'm with you. He's going to be a problem. 21% pass rush win rate. That's 9th in the FBS. 25 run stops. That was tied for 3rd most in the Power 5. Yeah, he's going to be a problem. Along with Shamar Turner on that defensive line. He's a D tackle. He's about 6'3", 320. He had 6 sacks last year. Those two guys are going to they're extremely disruptive. And those are arguably the 2 best players on the team, in my opinion, CJ. I think those are 2 best players on the team.
Yeah, definitely. Shamar Turner's a stud. Texas fans should know him, right? He was on that same defensive line in high school at DeSoto with Byron Murphy. And you obviously – yeah. So at the time, Rod, it was Shamar Turner who was the 5-star prospect that kind of got all the acclaim, all of the recognition. And then there was Byron Murphy kind of as – what some fans at the time kind of viewed as like a consolation. If you don't get Shamar, maybe you get Byron, you come away with a pretty good player. Well, it turns out Byron Murphy was pretty darn good in his own right. Shamar Turner going into year 4 here, going to be very good again for the Aggies this year. Here's one thing, Rod, I wanted to point out. It's very important to have depth all the way throughout your defense. And right now for Texas A&M, I think their top level depth is very good defensively, right? They were 33rd in the country a year ago in points per game allowed at 23.6. They didn't have a bad defense, and now they have a better defensive-minded coach with a lot of that defense returning and some pretty impressive additions out of the portal, right? We've talked about Nick Scourton up front, but how about Desmond Ricks out of Alabama coming in, trying to get a fresh start again, maybe see some more opportunities with Texas A&M, a former, really high recruit at the time. But at every level of that defense, Rob, they've got a guy that you look at and say, oh, okay, we got to account for him. Right? Interior, it's going to be Shamar Turner. On the edge, Nick Scourton. Linebacker, it's Torian York. And I know Texas fans might hear that name and remember what he said at SEC Media Days. Of course, he's saying, I don't keep contact with anybody at Texas, right? They didn't recruit me. I don't like them. I can't wait to play them, essentially. That's again, that game's going to mean something for these players on the field, as well as all these fans in the stands. And then obviously in the back end, Bryce Anderson, another familiar name from the Port Arthur, kind of Golden Triangle area, as well as Desmond Ricks, who I just mentioned there. So they got really talented front end guys. Now, we've talked about injuries, and we've talked about where this game is played on the schedule, right? That final game of the regular season. Do you have enough depth defensively and whole kind of roster-wise to sit there, sustain an injury or two, and still have that top level of production on your defense? And right now, that's the big question, because you're going to lose pieces at some point this year. Texas a year ago had great injury luck, and I think that's a big reason in which you saw them sustain that level of play and improve as the season went on. If the injury bug bites A&M, they could be in for a bit of a downer come the end of this season. I think that their starting 22 is very talented. Their starting 11 defensively, very talented. But after that, do you have the horses to stay up in this race with the Texas offense that is going to throw the ball and have success with Quinn Ewers on the road? I think that's a big question mark right now.
Yeah, no, it's a good point about the depth. I'm with you. I really like some guys in that secondary for the Aggies. I'm a big fan of the nickelback, Bryce Anderson. I think he's a good player when I watch him. Tyreek Chappelle, I believe is his name. He's been in that secondary for a while. He has a corner. I think he's a pretty good player. Pretty consistent. So I actually brought in some transfers via the transfer portal in the secondary. Trey Jones, safety out of Central Michigan. BJ Mays, I believe, is a cornerback out of UAB. So they'll bring in some reinforcement there, trying to address the depth you're talking about. But before we close it out, something else I want to bring up just about this defense. Last year, they were one of the best pass rushes and one of the best run defenses in the SEC. They were 7-1 when they allowed 22 points or fewer. 0-5 when they allowed more than 22 points. They were 7-0 when they allowed less than 250 rush yards. 0-5 when giving up more. So when this defense actually, I'm with you. They were a good defense last year. There's a chance they could be better this year than they were last year. It was a really good defense last year. So that's actually what the Mike Elko effect could be with his.
I agree.
Yeah.
14 transfers, Rod, on the defensive side of the ball alone. So, you talk about that new scheme coming over from Mike Elko. I know it's kind of familiar, having been there previously as the defensive coordinator at A&M. Not a lot of same bodies, consistency from when he was previously there ahead of the Duke stint, but 14 transfers. We talked about that depth and that ability to get too deep that you can trust. These guys are going to have to go from for a lot of them, right? We talked about Nick Scourton leading the Big Ten in sacks, but a lot of these guys are coming from schools like Troy, South Alabama, some UTSAs. They're making a big jump. And so that will be interesting late in the season to see if they're ready for the SEC play. So similar conversation to Texas, obviously, right? So that'll be interesting. But I'm with you. I think Mike Elko is a great defensive coordinator. And I think with the pieces that we've gone over at each level, he'll find ways to get them to shine and, kind of focus on them and highlight them in his defense in ways that Sarkisian does offensively, trying to get those guys creative opportunities to touch the ball.
Yeah, those 14 transfers on defense, I believe almost half of those are in the secondary alone, to your point about trying to build up that back end. All right, good stuff. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that, like I said, I think their defense actually may be one of the best defenses in the SEC, but we shall see. Time will tell. All right, good stuff there, CJ. Appreciate the breakdown there for the Longhorns and the Aggies. Everybody looking forward to that game. And, guys, that will finish up our way too early Longhorn season preview. So next week, we're actually having game previews, ladies and gentlemen. It's game week. So we appreciate all you guys. Thanks to CJ for, once again, all the great nuggets of information. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank all you guys for watching. And until next time, hook 'em horns.